Welcome back. Today I'm going to show you an aspect of Egyptian counting where they changed the world. But first, we have to go over our homework. First, I asked you to translate 11,287 scribes into hieroglyphs. We start with scribe, sesh, which is the scribe's palette followed by the man determinative. Remember, even though we have 11,287 scribes, when counting things, we usually use the singular form of the noun. Now comes our numbers. We remember that we start with the highest units, which in this case is 10,000. That's represented by one finger. Next, we have 1,000. The thousands are lotuses, so we add one lotus. Our next unit is the hundreds, and hundreds are coils. Since it's 200, we add 2 coils. Next is the tens units. Tens are hoops, so we have to add 8 of them for the 80 part. Let's do them in 2 neat rows of 4. Last, we have the ones units. There are 7 ones, so we add 7 strokes. And that's how we write 11,287 scribes. Good. Our next phrase was 87 donkeys. That's easier. Let's start with a donkey. Next, we have 8 tens. So we do our orderly 2 rows of 4 hoops each. For the 7, we simply add the 7 strokes, and we have it, 87 donkeys. These first 2 phrases were our counting examples. The next phrase, 57.5 hecats, is different. It's measuring units of grain. We need different units, the hecat. Well, we start with the word for hecat. The crook is the HQA triliteral, and by itself it often means ruler. Tutankhamun is shown on his coffins holding the crook and flail as symbols of authority. Here, with the extra phonetic hieroglyphs and the determinative of grain pouring, it's our unit of measure. Now, we count them with our numbers. For the 57 part, we start with 5 hoops. Next, we need 7, so we add 7 strokes. That's the easy part. For the 1/2, because we're dealing with hecats, we don't use the ordinary fraction for 1/2. We use a special hieroglyph for 1/2 that is based on the eye of Horus. Remember, the different parts of the eye are the hieroglyphs for different fractions. We can see that the left side of the eye is the 1/2 hieroglyph. So we add that shape to our 57, and we have it. Let's do our next homework phrase, which was also an amount of grain. 4 1/4 hecats. Again, we start with hecat. Next, we add the 4 strokes for 4. Okay, now it's time for the fraction 1/4. We have to go back to the diagram of Horus's eye. We find the 1/4 hieroglyph. It's the pupil, the circle, so we add that for the 1/4. And that's 4 1/4 hecats. Good. Our last 2 phrases were linear measures, so let's look at them. The first was a boat, 52 cubits, 4 palms, and 3 digits long. That's nearly the length of the famous Cheops boat that was discovered buried in a pit next to the Great Pyramid of Giza. The boat was discovered when the Antiquity Service was surveying the wall near the Great Pyramid. A sharp-eyed architect on the team noticed that the wall wasn't perfectly uniform. There was a bulge. When he excavated this area, he discovered that this section of the wall didn't rest on bedrock. It was built on top of huge limestone blocks that sealed a pit. When the blocks were removed, there was a dismantled 170-foot-long boat, looking a bit like a giant boat model kit, just waiting to be assembled. It took several attempts and more than 20 years to reassemble the boat. This model didn't come with instructions. But today, you can visit it in its special museum on the Giza Plateau where it was found. So, for our sentence, we begin with a boat. That's depet. Next, we need the cubit hieroglyph. There are two ways we can write cubit. One is just with the arm, but let's do it the long way for practice with the whip, the arm neh. Okay, now the tens units. So we add 5 hoops. For the ones, we do the 2 strokes. Now it's time for the palms. Remember, there are 7 palms per cubit, and we can use the crescent moon as an abbreviation for palm. It's 4 palms, so we add our 4 strokes beneath the crescent moon. The last unit is the digits, and there are 3, so we add 3 finger hieroglyphs. And that's our boat of 52 cubits, 4 palms, and 3 digits. We had one last phrase, and it too was a linear measurement. We want a house 1 rod, 4 cubits, 3 palms long. Well, we start with our house, per. Now we need the word for rod, which is chet. Since it's 1 rod, let's add a single stroke. Next, we have the word for cubit. This time, let's use the shortcut so we get used to seeing it both ways. We'll just use the arm with a stroke, leaving out the whip. We need 4 strokes because it's 4 cubits. Last, we need 3 palms. So we start by adding the crescent moon for the palm. Finally, we add the 3 strokes because it's 3 palms. And that's a house of 1 rod, 4 cubits, and 3 palms in length. When I created this example of a house with a length of 1 rod, 4 cubits, 3 palms, I did so for teaching purposes. Actually, a builder in ancient Egypt would have probably planned a house in even cubits, just like an architect planning a house today would use even units of feet. He wouldn't plan a house with a width of 75 feet 4 inches. Knowing ancient Egyptian units of measure often helps archaeologists when excavating. They have an idea of what units the builders were thinking in and know what to expect. If in one wall they have excavated it's in exact cubits, but another wall is partially missing, knowing the units may help reconstruct the length of the missing part. There's a lot of reasons why it's good to know hieroglyphs. Now that we know how to measure grain, houses, boats, and all kinds of things, let's turn to the measurement of something just as real, but far less tangible: time. Very few people realize it, but we get our 365-day calendar from the ancient Egyptians. The calendar was crucial to Egypt's success as a nation. As you'll remember, Egypt was great because of the Nile. Each year, the Nile overflowed its banks, depositing rich topsoil, enabling Egypt to grow more food than it needed. This, in turn, enabled them to support a standing professional army and rule the ancient Near East. Even with the bounty the Nile brought, work was involved. Just before the Nile overflowed its banks, the entire nation was mobilized to dig irrigation canals to bring the Nile and the topsoil inland so that more land could be farmed. But they had to know when the Nile was going to rise. And this is where the calendar comes in. The Egyptians observed that the Nile rose each year about the same time when the very bright star Sirius began to appear in the sky with the rising sun. This occurred around July 19th on our calendar. But the Egyptians needed to know a few weeks before this occurred so they could begin digging the canals in preparation for the flood. The event occurred about every 365 days, so the Egyptians invented a calendar to measure the time. The year, pronounced Renpet, was divided into 12 months. The tall, thin hieroglyph is a palm branch and often serves as an ideogram for year. The word for month, Abid, was written like this. The crescent moon, when combined with the star, was the Abid part. The sun determinative tells you it has something to do with time. Often, the word for month was simply the crescent moon. Just like in our calendar, there were 12 months. But for the Egyptians, each month was divided into 30 days. There's an obvious problem with this calendar. It adds up to only 360 days, while the natural cycle is 365. If you worked with a 360-day calendar, every year you'd be 5 more days out of sync with the natural world. For example, if you were planning on digging your canals and you wanted to allow 20 days for the project, after you started using a 360-day calendar, the first year the Nile would rise 5 days early, and you'd only have 15 days to dig your canals. After 2 years, you'd be 10 days late, and you'd only have 10 days to dig your canals, and so on. The Egyptians quickly realized that a 360-day calendar would not do, so they added 5 days at the end, making 365. Even this is not without problems. The natural cycle, the astronomical calendar, is actually 365 and a quarter days long. So every 4 years, the calendar would be 1 day off from the astronomical calendar. Every 40 years, it would be 10 days off. And after a century, it would be 25 days off. We take care of this with leap year, where we add an extra day, February 29th, every 4 years. The Egyptians didn't do this, and it caused great confusion in written documents. This was especially noticeable with regard to the seasons. There were times when the civil calendar said it was summer, but nature said it was winter. The Egyptians had 3 seasons of 4 months each. As you might expect, the seasons were based on the activity of the Nile. One was pronounced Achet and was written like this. This was the season when the fields, you can see the fields in the hieroglyphs, were underwater. So we call this season inundation. Inundation was followed by winter. And if you look at the hieroglyphs, you can see the root, per, which could refer to 2 things, house or to go forth. In this case, it's to go forth. During this season, the fields emerge or go forth from the water. So we call this season emergence. It was pronounced peret. The last season was written like this and was pronounced shemu. We think it means an absence of water. There's a pool hieroglyph, water hieroglyphs, but also the sun, which may have dried them out. It's just a guess. We all just call the season summer. Now, let's look at a date. Let's take it a word at a time. I bet you all recognize the first word. It's year. But let me explain something about it. We now know the word for year is renpet. But when we have it in a date, it's not called renpet. It's called hatzep. Occasion. The idea is that we're not talking about a year in the abstract, we're talking about a particular date and occasion. The circle, with all the dots in it, is a threshing floor of a granary. It was pronounced sep. we still translate the word as year. We just know it's a date. We can see 2 strokes after year. So it's the second year of something. Next is our month crescent moon hieroglyph with 3 strokes. So it's the 3rd month. Next, we have our season, achet, inundation. This is followed by the sun hieroglyph. It has 1 stroke under it, which might make us think it's the ideogram for sun. But since it's a date, it means day, and the 1 stroke under it means 1, day 1. That's the date part. But there's more. Let's see what it means. The next 2 hieroglyphs, the placenta and mouth, cher, means under. The Fuller's Club, pronounced hem, is majesty, as in royalty. The Fuller's Club, you'll remember, was used by washermen in their work. We have an N, which is of or to with regard to people. So it's under the majesty of. Next, we have the sedge plant and the bee, emblems of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt. Finally, the cartouche with the king's name. It was pronounced Nemat-Re. And we can see all the elements of it. The water sign is the Ne. The goddess with the feather of truth on her head is Ma'at. And the sun is Re. The sun and the goddesses are written first for what we called honorific import. No matter how it's pronounced, the gods are written first. We can now translate it as 2nd year, 3rd month of inundation, day 1, under the majesty of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Nemat-Re. Nemat-Re was also known as Amenemhet III, a king of the Middle Kingdom. As we saw from the Narmer palette early in this course, everything centered around the king, even the calendar. The date we have just translated, occurring during the 2nd year of King Amenemhet III's reign. But what year was that? Was it 1930 BC? 1330 BC? It doesn't tell us. It just tells us it was the 2nd year of his reign. This creates a problem for Egyptologists who want to figure out dates for events mentioned in Egyptian records. There's no consecutive sequence of numbered years in the Egyptian calendar. When old Amenemhet died, the calendar was reset to year 1 of the reign of his successor. In order to figure out precise dates that correspond to our calendar, Egyptologists have to look for external events that are fixed. For example, if a text mentions an eclipse, they can calculate when that eclipse occurred and then have a precise date to count from. Sometimes it could be a battle that the enemy dated with his consecutive calendar, so then we know when the Egyptians fought the Hittites or the Persians on a certain date. In this way, Egyptologists build up exact dates. Still, the Egyptians were the first to create a 365-day calendar, and that was a great achievement. It didn't just influence their daily life, it affected their plans for immortality. As I said before, the Egyptians viewed the next world pretty much as a continuation of this one, only air-conditioned. In the scenes of the next world, painted on the tomb walls of the nobles, the deceased are always in their finest linens. When they're seen at banquets, hunting in the marshes, or even working in the fields, it's fine linen. Earlier, I told you about the corvée, the roll call for every able-bodied man to come and work for the benefit of the country. The Egyptians believed there'd be such a roll call in the next world too. Remember the magical servants that were placed in their tombs, the Ushaptis, the little statues? They were called Ushaptis because when your name was called in the next world to work on the irrigation ditches, the little statue would come to life and answer for you, saying, "Here I am." They were also called Shaptis, which was spelled slightly differently. The ancient Egyptians were buried with 365 Ushaptis, one for each day of the year. Sometimes even more, with an overseer Ushabti for every 10 workers to make sure they didn't slack off on work. So even when they took them to the next world, it was based on their calendar. So the 365-day calendar was Egypt's great contribution to the world. But it wasn't their only contribution to timekeeping. They were also the first to divide the day into 24 hours. There were 12 hours of the day and 12 of night. The word for hour looked like this. The hair is the WN biliteral. The water sign, the N, is the phonetic complement. Next, we have the nupot. It's another biliteral. And it's followed by the feminine T. So all of this phonetic part of the word for hour was wanut. The star and the sun determinatives tell us the word has something to do with time. That's how it was in its full form. It could also be abbreviated. For example, try to figure out this sentence fragment. There are some things with which you aren't familiar, but still, you can do it. Well, we recognized most of the hieroglyphs for hour, followed by 4 strokes. So it must be the 4th hour. Then we should recognize our word for night, gera. The water sign and the loaf T between hour and night are the of, so it's the 4th hour of the night. Hours were used mainly for religious rituals, not for daily appointments. All the average Egyptian cared about was, is it light or dark? He didn't have to eat at noon. He ate when he was hungry. We now have some understanding of the Egyptian calendar and how it worked. We know that there were 365 days to the year that were divided into 3 seasons. Each season was made up of 4 months of 30 days each, and there were 24 hours to the day, 12 for night and 12 for daytime. While the Egyptians were not skilled astronomers, not like the Babylonians, they did observe their night sky and grouped stars into constellations. Sometimes they painted these constellations on their tomb ceilings. One of the earliest of these ceilings is the 18th dynasty tomb of Senmut, Queen Hatshepsut's right-hand man. Another famous astronomical ceiling is in the Valley of the Kings, in the 20th dynasty tomb of Ramses VI. It features the goddess Nut, with her body stretched across the ceiling, her legs hanging down one wall and her arms down another. Nut swallowed the sun in the evening and gave birth to it in the morning. And we can see it traveling through her body in the evening. On the ceiling are the Egyptian constellations. Just like us, they saw figures in random groupings of stars. They saw hippopotami, lions, and other animals. But they didn't attribute specific meaning to them. Ramses' ceiling is important, but even more important and more famous is the Dendera zodiac. The Temple of Dendera was built during the Ptolemaic period when Greeks were ruling Egypt. Built in the Egyptian style, it was dedicated to Hathor, goddess of music and beauty. It's a very special temple, and it's celebrated for its famous zodiac, which I've mentioned a few times already in this course. On the temple's upper level, the stone ceiling was carved with the heavens as they were perceived during the Greek period. While Napoleon's savants were copying scenes on temple walls, 2 of his engineers, Jollois and Devlier, spent a week on their backs making a precise copy of the Dendera zodiac. You can see many of the signs of the zodiac that we have today. There's Taurus, the bull, and you can see Aries, the ram. The Dendera zodiac is unique for several reasons. It portrays the heavens as a circle, which is seen nowhere else in Egyptian representations of the heavens. It also depicts the lunar and solar eclipses of 52 and 51 BC. See the eye of Horus in the circle? That's the symbol for a lunar eclipse. It probably has to do with the ending of the myth of Isis and Osiris, where the son Horus defeats his father's murderer, Set, but has his eye taken out. It's restored by Thoth, and thus is similar to the waxing and waning of the moon. The symbol of the solar eclipse is Isis within a circle, holding what seems to be a baboon. This symbol is one of those that's unclear, and I won't even hazard a guess. The important thing is that knowing there was both a lunar and solar eclipse in the year the Dendera zodiac was designed allowed modern scholars of the 21st century to determine that the year was between 52 and 51 BC. When the illustration of the Dendera zodiac was first published in the Description de l'Egypte, scholars didn't know the exact date of the Dendera zodiac, and it started a controversy involving the age of the world. These were times before the theory of evolution, and no one had the faintest idea of how old the Earth was. In the 17th century, Bishop Ussher had used the begats in the Bible, the sections where it says, so-and-so begat so-and-so. He used those sections to calculate that the universe was created 4,004 years ago. And this calculation was still accepted by many in the early 19th century. But when astronomers saw the position of the heavens on the zodiac and how much it differed from the present arrangement, they realized the world must be much older than 4,000 years. In 1820, the French antique dealer Sébastien Séligné hired Claude Lorrain to go to Egypt and bring back the Dendera zodiac. Using saws and gunpowder, he succeeded, and today, the Dendera zodiac is in the Louvre in Paris. When tourists in Egypt visit Dendera Temple and look up at the ceiling, they now see a plaster copy of the zodiac where the original once rested. Once the world realized how old Egypt was, Champollion began figuring out fairly precise dates for the reigns of the kings, and Egyptian history started to fall into an orderly chronology. For today's Egyptologists, translating dates is absolutely crucial to reconstructing the history. So get on your scribe's robes. I'm going to give you a couple of phrases involving dates for homework. First, translate year 8, third month of summer, third day of His Majesty Tutankhamun. Once you've got that, try year 36, second month of inundation, day 4 of His Majesty Ramses. I think you'll do just fine with these. I'll see you next time.